We want to cover some of the finance stuff for Melissa's perspective. So the past process, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be aligning, we're going to first be identifying what services you offer. So a yoga class, a membership to a facility, a rental, a sports league, those types of things. And then we fold those up into what we call service areas. So an example of service areas, I thought I had this up here, give me 1 second. Is that the one? No.
That's not our official website. Parks.com.
PG.
There it is, Parks and Recreation, MNCPPC Maryland. Is that what you went into before?
Yeah, this is where I wanted to go to. Or here, let me do. So the areas that we have, so for example, I said, if you have like swim classes or health and fitness classes or summer camps, those types of things. So we've identified each one individually, and that's what we're going to be doing through RecTrack. We're going to literally list every single program that you offer by barcode. And then we fold those up into generally areas that you've already identified. So we're going to, within aquatics, you could have 1,000 programs throughout the entire year. So, and we're going to be matching a fiscal year to the services that we want to match or the year. So is your fiscal year?
July 1 to June 30th.
So I'm assuming we're going to be looking at 18 because we're looking at 1 year of historical data. So you're on 19 now, correct? So we're going to be looking at 18. So we'll take 1 year of 18's expense information, and we're going to match that to your program information. So again, you could have 1,000 aquatics programs throughout the entire department. We're going to fold those up into an area called aquatics. All right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stop there and then move over to an example. So this is an actual client of mine. They've identified, they did that. They took all their aquatics programs and they said, yes, we want to analyze this by aquatics. And so they folded all those programs into aquatics, and then they identified an expense for that program area. So they said they have a direct expense and an indirect expense specific to aquatics. Now, do you know if you're facility-based management or program-based management? Meaning you could have, is aquatics under 10 different facilities in the budget? Or is it all by itself?
It is, aquatics is facility-based, so there's a sports health and wellness division, and they have multiple aquatic facilities that they manage.
But the programs emanate from the various community centers too, though, right? Not community centers, but
not the aquatic program.
Not the aquatic. Okay.
So the budget for those programs are under the facility and not separated out. Is that what you're saying?
Under the facility.
Okay. So one of the decisions we're going to have to make is, do we want to look at taking your facilities, turning them upside down and shaking them, and anything that falls out is a program basically. And we're going to separate those out, and that could be aquatics, it could be health and wellness, it could be camps. Do we want to look at analyzing your services by aquatics, by camps, by health and wellness, or do we want to analyze your services by the facilities themselves? So does that make sense? So, because if we look at, generally when we do this, we try to identify a service type. So we'll identify like all your facilities and have direct and indirect expenses for each of those different facilities, separated from the programs. So the service type here is, we call it course, programs, and having a separate budget there. So this is one of the bigger decisions, because this is what is going to drive all the other end results of this analysis. So we don't have to make the decision today, but I want to make sure that this is the big driver as to how we're going to gather the budget information and the program information.
I think we want to look at it by program.
Okay.
But I like the structure that you have.
Because it does match, I mean, because in theory, you have, this is the structure you're showing to the public.
Right.
And to be able to analyze it that way is very beneficial, especially if you're in a board meeting or a council meeting, those types of things, to say, here's our entire aquatics program with our entire aquatics budget. And our aquatics budget is $500,000. We have, 1,000 programs, and, this is what it costs per program per person. That's the end result of what we do. So taking this analogy a little bit further, when we analyze, is that big enough? I'll make it a little bigger here. So this is that same client. So you can see here that we've looked at aquatics. The reason this amount is a little bit more is we've taken aquatics and we've identified aquatics has a budget of $295,000, both direct and indirect specific to aquatics. So direct is like lifeguards, swim instructors, supplies and miscellaneous supplies and materials. Indirect could be the specific supervision of that just aquatics programming. And then on top of that, we're going to charge that aquatics program to use the facility. So this column that you're seeing right here, we're going to figure out what it costs per hour, per what I call a unit. So a unit is a lap lane or a half gymnasium or an activity room, a baseball field, those types of things. We're going to figure out those costs per hour. And we're going to charge those programs to use those facilities. And there's we can charge 100% of what it costs or a percentage of that. We can talk about that later, but we're going to charge those programs to use those facilities. So we get a total cost of $419,000. What's included in this is part of your salary, director, HR, finance, marketing. We won't go into details with that, but we identify all those expenses as well separate from programs and facilities. And just to show you what that looks like when we upload it, this is all the admin area of expenses. This specific client didn't have a listing for all of them, but what we're going to do is we're going to identify, here's the top line budget for all of Parks and Recreation. It could be $100,000, it could be $10 million. And then the system's going to automatically allocate those expenses by percent of budget. And to show you an example of what that looks like, it's not a very clean example.
This is what I do.
So this level here, if you can think of level 1, level 2, and level 3. So level 1, again, this is HR, finance, marketing, director. It's the area of the department that should be allocated to every service that you offer, every facility, every program, every membership. That's that first level. The second level, we generally, and it doesn't have to be this way, but we generally break it up by parks and then recreation. So generally there's somebody who oversees all of recreation, and generally there's somebody who oversees, say, all parks. And again, we can mix and match that. But following the recreation side of things, so under recreation, there could be recreation facilities, recreation point of sale facilities, and I'll get into that here in just a second, recreation point of sale programs, and then recreation programs. This nomenclature, don't worry about. We can make it whatever you want. We can actually make it people's names. We can say, here's Bob, here's Sue, here's Joe.
No, we don't want that.
Yeah, but we could get to that if you wanted to. But again, underneath this side, we're going to distribute things by percent of budget. And so flowing back up, so if we have, say, under recreation, we have recreation programs. So you could have one person or a group of people who oversee all of your programming. So it's not like the aquatic supervisor, it's that person's supervisor. And so then what's going to happen underneath that person is you can list all your recreation programs. So each time, like if aquatics is 10% of this budget, they're going to get 10% of that expense. If aquatics is 1% of this budget, they're going to get 1% of that expense. And if they're 0.25% of that budget, they're going to get 0.25 of that. So that's how we've added up to get this $375,000. With the facility expenses on top of that, we get the $419,000. So I'm going to take you through this whole example. So follow my lead here. So the next, I'm going to open up another instance of the software itself. doesn't record my keystrokes, does it?
It doesn't see the character.
Okay, just making sure.
Did it do that?
I don't know, I'm just asking if it's, I'm just wondering in the
If I
background.
see it,
Yeah.
I'll blow it up.
Okay. So following that example of aquatics, so they have $419,000. So let's go look at what that actually looks like. And I'm going to run a very detailed report here. Don't worry too much about the information on the report, but so each of these reports you can filter by season and service areas and service categories. So when we get into the stoplight stuff, you'll be able to filter by that as well. So I'm going to filter it by aquatics. And in this example, we have 547 individual programs. So this is spring, summer, fall, winter. Every barcode that's listed that's 547 individual programs. You know, it was on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m., that kind of thing. So the way this past system works is I'm just going to go to the last page here to show you that the budget of that $419,000 is right here. So we're accounting for every single penny of that $419,000. How it's distributed is by participation hours. So I won't go into the deep algorithm unless you want me to later on, but basically what we're saying is that if your program takes place it meets once a week for 16 weeks for an hour a week, that's 16 hours of participation time in addition to the minimum number of participants. So if you have, your minimum is say 10, you now have 160 hours of participation. You have 160 total participation hours. That's the number we use. We divide that by the total of all participation hours to get the percent usage of the specific program. And that's what this column here is. So this last program is 3.65% of the total participation hours for that just aquatics area. So therefore, they're going to get 3.65% of the 419,000. Therefore, they have a total. This program has to account for $14,946. So, is this methodology perfect? In no way. Is it going to get you very close? Yes. And so we're basing everything off of total participation hours for the program. The caveat to this is that, if you use a different facility, we're going to charge you different facility costs. So one facility could cost maybe $10 an hour, and another one could cost $20 an hour. So depending on where you're holding that program, you'll have additional facility costs added onto that. But in general, we look at the participation hours as the driver for how we're going to allocate out the expenses. Questions?
How did they get to their totals, Boulder? How did they?
So you mean the dollar amounts?
Yes.
Their system was, they use Munis as their finance system. What's your finance system?
In Fort Lawson.
And I've never heard of it. Is it Tyler Technologies? No. Okay. Okay. So anyways, they go through and they've actually redone how they do their budget, because they used to budget, like aquatics used to be across 20 different general ledger accounts.
Okay.
Now they've said, okay, yeah, we want to start budgeting this way. It doesn't happen overnight. It's taken about 4 years for them to get to that. But they've got it now where they can run reports in Munis to give them these numbers. And again, you can think of this process as, yes, at the end of the day, we're going to give you what it costs to run a program in a facility, but it's also going to make you think about how you budget, how you enter stuff into RecTrack, how you do reporting, things like that. It's not to say you have to do it. It's just to say, if this is how you want to analyze your information, maybe think about how you enter stuff into your software systems. So the short answer is they just are now able to download it directly from Munis to get those numbers.
So the first iteration of the whole stoplight model, we limited ourselves to the guide categories, which is what I think you went back to in Parks and Recreation, the website. For this go round, we have decided that we want to see everything: rentals, facilities. So could you show me an example that is not listed in Parks and Recreation in our website, how we would get that information? Like for a rental. The rentals are not listed. When you go back to the website, those were only program areas, right? Those are all program areas in the guide.
Right. So if we look at,
But we do other things.
right, so let's look at your rentals.
Okay.
So we have, let's do picnic shelters. So one of the things, well, let me back up. One of the ways we look at doing all this work is we've identified a service type. So we're going to identify facilities, we're going to identify programs, and then we're going to identify memberships that take place at facilities. So on this tab here, so when we gather this information, I don't know why that's, so let me give you an example. So this is the type of information we're going to be gathering on your facilities. So we're going to say, let's look at and you can think of this as what's the physical address location. So if you have a pool, an outdoor pool, a rec center, a park, athletic fields, think of the physical address as the starting point. So in this example, they have some general parks, they have a civic area, they have a mall area. They've got an outdoor pool, a couple of those. They have community centers and recreation centers, sports fields, etc. What we're going to be looking at doing is identifying all those facilities that are tied to a budget and say, okay, what is in that facility? So if we were to look at, say, a community center, we're going to look at, okay, does it have a weight room, a basketball court, inside track, climbing wall, all those things that take place or the physical spaces within that facility. And let's just go to the visual example here. So this is the recreation center I used to manage a long time ago. So what we're doing here is we're going to take this recreation center and we're going to say, okay, here's a lap pool, here's a leisure pool, here's a basketball gym, this is a gymnastics room, so it's a specific to gymnastics, racquetball court, a dance room, a weight room, childcare, multi-purpose rooms, and then a yoga room. So what we want to do is identify that type of space and break it down into a structure that mimics the diagram that I just showed you. So you can see here that this is the rec center. We have multi-purpose rooms, specialized facilities, swimming pool. So we have the childcare room, which is here. And within that childcare room, there's only one unit. It's just the entire room. We don't break up the room and individually rent out that room. And then the facility unit service capacity of that room. So what that means is it's not fire code. We don't use square footage in any of our calculations. We look at what is the service that's taking place most of the time at the facility. And we use this number as part of the algorithm to figure out what it costs per hour. So in the childcare room, they say that it's not the max of the room, it's how many people generally will be in that childcare room. So in this case, it's 25. So fitness rooms. So this was one. So we have a dance room, a yoga room, and 3 multi-purpose rooms. They're all used generally for fitness. So basically what happens in all of those spaces is that it's either dance, yoga, or some type of drop-in exercise class. They're also, the multi-purpose rooms can be used for like birthday parties and stuff like that. But in general, those rooms are used for fitness. So instead of listing each one individually, we just said there's 5 of them. And in general, the capacity, even though the rooms are a little bit different in size, generally the capacity for each of the rooms is about 40 people for the activities taking place in those rooms. And then moving forward, so we have a gymnastics room. In the gymnastics room, it's one big open space. And so there's no divisible space necessarily, so we look at what we call them pods. So in that gymnastics room, they have 9 elements so they have like balance beam and floor and those types of things. So each one of those we call the pod. And you can think of a pod as how many classes would you hold in that space at the same time? So they'll hold 9 individual programs in that space at the same time. So that's where we get the 9 pods, and then each pod can have about 10 kids on it. And then there's a weight room, 1 pod, about 10 people, but that's for a class, not the general size of the gymnasium. So in the gymnasium, there's the ability to put a net down the middle and separate them out. So you can have like kids playing soccer on one side and adults playing basketball on the other side. So they'll rent it individually. So instead of saying it's a full gym, they call it a half gym, and there's 2 pods. And then they put, in this case, they said 30 because it's actually used more for camps than it is for anything else. Racquetball court, self-explanatory. The lap pool, so there's 8 lanes in the lap pool. It's a 25-yard pool, and they generally have about 4 people per lane.
32.
Yeah, so that's part of the calculation. And then in the leisure pool, again, there's no discernible space, so they call it pods, and it's basically they have 5 pods because they'll have 5 learn to swim classes at the same time. So that's, again, we'll look at every facility you have. This goes to rentals, and this goes to parks. You know, like if you have a 10-acre park, but you only have 1 little picnic shelter there, we'll look at breaking up the park into, say, acres, but we'll also put that individual shelter in the park as well. So, because what we're going to get to eventually is what does it cost to run the entire park, but also what does it cost to run that shelter as well. So when we're looking at, I hope this is a long answer to your question. So we'll be looking at identifying every one of your facilities that we want to tie to the budget. And I want to emphasize, and I'll say this now, you might have, what's your total budget?
275 million.
So out of that 275 million, we might say for this analysis, we've identified 100 million of that we're going to analyze. We don't have to do it all. In fact, I would encourage us not to try to bite it all off at the first go round.
Do it by fund, because you have a couple of funds, right?
So you could say, well, all of our programs, all of our recreation programs are in this fund, and we can look at that, and all the facilities attached to those programs are in this fund, and we could just do that, and that might come out to be $80 million, or I don't know, but that would be something that we definitely want to identify before we start doing all the work, because we could say, well, here are the areas that we want to analyze. Here are the, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but if you look at it from a perspective of, here's what we know we want to get going on and analyzing, and so let's identify those first and attach the budget to that. Because if we were to list every single facility you have, this process could take over a year. And I don't know if you want to go down that route. So I'm not disencouraging it, but I'm not.
I don't know if we can afford you for a whole year.
So, question.
Yes.
So we're going to look at FY18. So there needs to be some transfer of data from our budget system into this system to provide that analysis, because you're going to pull the revenue information from RecTrack, correct?
All I want is we need to identify the areas,
Okay.
and then I want direct and indirect.
Okay.
That's it.
So once we do the analysis, how is the tool used moving forward? So now I'm a facility manager and I'm looking to put on a program, but I want to see what my cost recovery margin will be.
Right.
What does that tool look like? Or is it more or less an analysis after the program has happened where you're importing the budget and pulling in the revenue?
So this process is, so we want to show you where you've been to help you figure out where you want to go. So this bigger process is going to show you where you've been. So we're going to be able to identify, we're going to say this specific program is at 25% cost recovery. We're also going to identify where that program falls in the stoplight. And we're going to identify what type of cost recovery. Well, first of all, we're going to be able to tell you by the stoplight model what your current cost recovery is. So let me show you that. So when we look at, we're going to identify what I call service categories. So a service category is your stoplight model in my terminology. So if I'm going to run a report here by service category, so this is an overall summary report by what I call service category. So this column here equates to your stoplight. So you might have, green, yellow, and red, but you probably want to have some subcategories to that, maybe break it up a little bit more, or maybe not. This client has 9, 10 really, service categories. And their classification is, you can think of C as community, R as recreation, and E as exclusive. So it's somewhat like your stoplight, green, but they've subcategorized that a little bit more to say, yeah, within recreation, which would be your yellow, we have 6 categories, subcategories to that. And we can, again, Leon and I will get into more of that, what that could look like. But what we're going to do, and again, Melissa, to answer your question, is we're going to identify what the actual revenue was per those categories. We're going to tell you what the expense was per those categories. We're going to give you the min, max, and average cost recovery levels. So think of that as we're going to show you what the lowest one is, what the highest one is, and what the average cost recovery level is by category, to help you then identify where you want to go as a community. So, for example, if we look at, say, R6, or let's look at R2. So R2's revenue was $5,500. Their expense, and let's do R6. I'm going to do R6. That's the biggest category. So R6, and I'm just going to click on this real quick. So under R6, there's 1,101 individual classes, and they span the entire spectrum from health and wellness to aquatics to dance to all the different categories. They span that. So of that 1,100 programs, their revenue was 1.3 million. Their expense was 1.5 million. Their min cost recovery, so there's a program in there that had 0 cost recovery. There's also a program in there that had 740% cost recovery. But and this is a weighted average, the weighted average is 111. Because if you divide this by that, that's not 111. But what this is it's a weighted average, if you will. It's to say that basically, if you took all the averages of all those programs, what's right in the middle is 111. So what we say is that this is where you're at right now. Do you want to use that as a guide to help you figure out where you want to go in the future? So they decided that at this level, they want an average of 80% cost recovery. So these are programs that are generally like adult type of stuff and/or programs that the community is deemed there shouldn't be as much subsidy to those programs as others. So by using this 80% cost recovery for each individual program, I'm just going to click in here again. So let's look at this summer camp for gymnastics. So this summer camp for gymnastics program, it's this one here. Put it on the top there. Okay. So this summer camp program, the total cost of this was $2,800. They are currently charging, and this is a drill down report, so I have to look for the information here. So their actual cost recovery right now is 513%, but they want to have an average of 80. So some of them are going to be more, some are going to be less, but on average, you're not going to lower the fee for a class if you're already above it. But let's say that this percent was 20%. Then you would think about, okay, well, is it in the right category? First of all, is it in the right stoplight category? And then if it is, then you might say, okay, we need to really look at, where should we hold this program? Is it being held at the right facility? Is the minimum too low? Do we need to raise the minimum? So the information, again, this is a long answer to your question, but we're going to show you where you're at to help you guide you where you want to go in the future. In addition to this software, you'll have access to another software called PassLight. PassLight is a projective software, meaning individuals can go in and type in individual programs and do their own budgets and that kind of thing and just get a quick answer like that if they want. But this process is to kind of give you a big picture of to say, okay, let's look at an entire program area, because if an entire program area is doing great or doing badly from a financial perspective, that's what we want to see. So
No, that answers my question, knowing that there was another tool for the forecasting side. I'm good.
But this is, we want to get this work done first before we go to that, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
As soon as she gets it.
So the big decisions that need to be made from a financial perspective are, what are the areas that we're going to analyze? And how are we going to break it up? Like we talked about, are we going to break them out by programs and then facilities separately? And can we get the expenses? Revenues should be coming from RecTrack. They hopefully match what's in your finance system, but at the end of the day, we want to look at grabbing the expenses for those areas first. So, you know, are we going to be identifying are these the areas that we're going to, or some of them, maybe not all of them, but are we going to do it by this and get the direct and indirect expenses? And in addition to that, what are the facilities that we want to analyze? And then the third question is of the $275 million, what are we analyzing? Are there areas that we can say next year, 2 years from now, the heart of what we want to analyze this year is this? And that's a big question for this afternoon's meeting.
So when do we incorporate the stoplight categories, or do we just use what we currently have?
So what we'll be doing, and I'll just give you an example here. So this is this tab here. So we're gonna be downloading all of this information into an Excel spreadsheet, because you guys use RecTrack, somebody else uses Active, somebody else uses CivicRec. So what I've decided is just let's gather all the data into a format that everybody's familiar with, which is Excel. So I'm going to give you a pre-formatted Excel spreadsheet, and I'm going to say, here's the tabs: expense tab, facility tab, course program tab, and I'll help you populate. I'll help you figure out, you know, the staff is going to have to download the data and help populate it. But part of what we're going to be doing is we're going to be leaving this column blank until we identify the stoplights to say, here are the levels that we've identified for the stoplight process. Once that's done, staff will then have to go back and attach whatever the stoplight number or category is to each individual program. It goes really quick generally. I mean, if you probably have like 10,000 programs, you can say, well, wow, we got it. So you'll be able to see, but you know, the aquatics person will be able to say, okay, these 20 are this, these 80 are this, and then you just copy it down. But that's what we'll be linking it before we upload it into the software.
Okay.
And that, because the data collection process takes anywhere from 2 to 6 months, that's why we can be working simultaneously on the stoplight stuff as the data collection process is happening. Other,
Foresee any problems getting expense information by facility, for example?
No, not by facility. The indirect pieces, so you're including, when you say you're going to charge the facility back, we obviously have to pick up the utility costs. So that lives in a separate database.
Yeah, if
that
you
would have to extract. So it's just pulling together, mining together all of those components just to get to that number. That's what's going to take some time.
Yeah, so if we were to look at, say, this community center, their direct expense, which is like staff and supplies and materials and all that kind of stuff, $650,000, and then utilities and supervision was $364,000. And that's just, it's no programs, it's just facility related stuff. One aspect of, and I'll bring this up now, is like lifeguards. Some people are like, well, is that an aquatics program cost or is that a facility cost? Whatever's easier to, wherever it is easier to leave it there. Because what will happen is if it's under the facility costs, that program's going to use the facility, therefore they're going to be charged back that cost anyways, so it's kind of a wash. If it's in the program and you're only making, say, 30%, 60% cost recovery, and there's a subsidy remaining from that program, we can take that subsidy and add it back to the facility to be covered by memberships. So it's don't worry about like lifeguards, it'll wash out in the end.
So, but the top part.
Yes.
Indirect.
So this is the part where we're going to have to identify. So this should be thought of as these are not any people touching the services, right? These are all admin type level people who are supervisors and all that kind of stuff. That is a whole nother, I think, half-hour discussion. We can go into it right now, but it's more of a you'll want to start to identify, if these are the areas we're going to identify, how do we want to break up the supervision of that above it? So, for example, if we have in our program areas, if you've identified, say, all these different program areas, is there one person who oversees that, or are there multiple people? And then who are the people who supervise those people? And then who are the people who supervise those people? And is that the top level, or are there more levels that we have to look at? We generally want to just stick with the 3 tiers for the indirect. If you're getting into more tiers than that, then it can get fairly complicated. Now, with a department your size, hopefully it'll fit into this. It should fit in this model. I've done Clark County, Nevada, and they're not as big as you, but they're pretty big. So, okay. Do we want to stop the recording at this point, or do you want to keep going?
What else were you gonna do?
That's the finance part. I mean, Melissa has to go, so we can.
Let's keep going.
Okay. So, to go back to this report here. So this is we're in the actual software right now, and this report is called the Grand Summary Report. This essentially matches to what the Excel document I was just showing you. So when we look at this Excel document and we look at the expense tab, we've identified the facilities, we've identified the program areas, and we've identified some membership areas. This report, you can see here, so the service type is courses. So these are all the ones that were listed on this Excel spreadsheet here, are listed here. And then we break it up into facilities, and we break it up into memberships areas and point of sale. We should talk about point of sale. So in my nomenclature, when I say point of sale, I mean resale items. So you can think of like a pro shop or a gift shop, or you have a concession stand at an outdoor pool, golf course. One of the aspects to this is that I haven't had one client use the portion of the software yet. And the reasoning is that most of their point of sale operations or resale items operations are $5,000, $10,000 type of operations. And to go through the work to analyze it, it's more work to analyze it than they're getting out of it, right? Because they're already charging, if they buy something for $1, they're selling it for $2, that type of thing. So there's no issue for them not analyzing it.
That's interesting, though. Do you have information like on golf courses? Because I don't know what the current situation is, but in the past, some of those golf courses have needed heavy subsidies from, in order to stay afloat.
Yeah. So are your golf courses in an enterprise fund?
Yes, I believe so.
So theoretically, they should already be making 100%.
But they're not.
Okay. So if you want to analyze them, so let me just show you what analyzing the point of sale stuff would look like. And this is a bad example because there's not much information. But what the type of data that we're going to be asking for is here. So we're going to be asking you to identify what facility category it belongs to. So you could maybe say golf courses. Then we're going to ask you for the specific golf course. And we're only looking at identifying the cost to run the resale item aspect. So if you have a golf course that costs $3 million a year to run, and they have a gift shop, and we know that the gift shop costs, say, $500,000 of that, we're going to need to separate that out. Then what we would do is we would literally go through and identify what is the type of resale item. So is it food? Is it clothing? Is it golf balls? That type of thing. We'd look at a brand name, the PLU code, the weight, size, weight, shape, the color. That stuff's important. It's not as important, but it's pretty important to identify, breaking it up. But then we want to get into how many were sold, what was the unit cost, so what did you buy it for, what did you sell it for, and what was the revenue. What the system will do is to say, okay, if this is how many you bought, if this is what you're selling it for, here's your current cost recovery. Do you want to have an 80% cost recovery, 90% cost recovery, 150% cost recovery? It'll then tell you what to sell it at. So it's a lot of information to download for really a calculation you can do on the back of a napkin. Now, some people, the reason I built it was to say, in case somebody said, yeah, we just want it to be big, we're going to do this whole thing, we want it to be bigger, a part of the bigger reporting process. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of work for a little return.
So camps are our bread and butter right now.
Okay.
June, half of June through the last week in August. How would we, we're in it now, so it would be 18, so you would look at last year's numbers then. Do you have an example of camps? Can I see how that works?
Certainly. So I'm going to pull open a report that is a so just so you know, the software is broken up into like administrative reports, coordinator reports, so this is kind of like programs, events, leagues, facility rental type reports, facility membership reports, and point of sale. So to answer your question, I'm going to go into a, let's go here. So each of those reports, so I have, all the reports in here are like spreadsheet type reports, but we have bar graphs and pie charts, and I haven't even shown you any of those yet, but I'm going to stick with the easy to view and understand reports at this time. So I'm going to, they have a camp session, so I could filter by that, but they might, you know, one of the staff persons might have accidentally put the summer session instead of the camp session. So the other way to do it would be to grab it by the service area of camps. So I'm just giving you an example because sometimes not everybody loads it perfectly. So I'm going to grab it by the camp section. So there are 72 individual camps. Now for this client, I know there's a lot of private companies who do camps as well. So they're just one provider of many different types of camps within the city. So I know with some municipalities, like they are the sole provider of camps. Some other cities don't even do camps because there is so many sole providers. But I just wanted to give you a context of why there's only 72 here. So we can look at, this report is showing you by it's breaking it up and it's sorting it by the activity title. So it's, you know, there's camps here, so these three are the same, individual. Yeah, Thanksgiving, holiday camps. And so again, they're listing each individual program, when it started, the barcode, the min-max, all that kind of stuff. And then it's giving you a summary by each individual area. So for example, if you have camps that you want to break down into, say you could have athletic type camps and educational type camps or field trip type camps. If you wanted to break it up and see them individually as a whole, but also individually, we can do that. So as an example here, so if we look at, say, the winter holiday camps, we're seeing that the revenue for this was that, the facility cost was this, and these aren't lining up perfectly, but I just wanted to, this is revenue is there, facility cost there, that type of thing. You can get the total expense. You'll see the individual cost recovery for each one. So you can see most of their camps have a pretty high cost recovery level, at least in this category. The cost recovery goal is 80%. At 80% cost recovery goal, this is what they'd be charging per participant. And just so these line up so you can kind of see better. So here's let's see here. So this is what they're charging right now. At an 80% cost recovery goal, they'd only have to charge that. So most likely what they would do is not lower the fee, but based on, yeah, but you can say, okay, hey, we're supposed to be at 80%, we're above it. Great. Staff, you're doing a great job, you don't have to do anything with it. Now, if this were to say be $10, and they had it, well, ooh, that'd be a tripling of the fee. So what most,
So we have to class it all, or
right.
all of that.
So the question becomes is, well, could we raise our minimums, is the first question. Second question is do we have it at a different location? Maybe it'll be less expensive to have it at a different location. The other question is we're not going to be able to get to that $30 fee this year, but maybe we can do increments to say, okay, in 3 years, we want to be at that fee. How are we going to get to that if we want to continue to offer the program? So there's a bunch of different aspects to this to say that this is not definitive information. It's more about here's the information to provide the managers and the supervisors to decide what they want to do moving forward.
It's interesting that you said it's not definitive information.
Well, let me rephrase that. The information is definitive. The
Okay.
decisions are not
Oh,
definitive.
yeah, okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Good clarification. The information is definitive. The decisions are not. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Other questions?
So show me some of the charts. Just
Okay.
give me a preview.
Yeah.
I know you'll do a more detailed one this afternoon. You'll be meeting with people who are much more hands-on than I am. I'm an administrator type. I'm strategic planning, organizational development. I do an occasional performance measure, but I'm not out there creating programs. So
Okay. So one of the reports, so this is called the Spectrum Report. So before I show you that, I don't have a copy of it here. Well, I'll just show it to you. There's a lot of information on this report.
woo!
But what this report should be is a bell curve. So it's what this is showing us is participation hours by, in your example, the stoplight categories.
Mhm.
So you can think of here on the bottom, these would be your stoplight categories. So this category theoretically would have the lowest cost recovery goal, and this category would have the highest cost recovery goal. And what we generally see, and it doesn't have to be a bell curve, but what we generally see is that most of your participation hours for your programming happen in the middle of your stoplight categories. So, for example, camps will probably fall somewhere in the middle. Swim lessons, youth sports leagues, those types of things. The participation hours generally fall somewhere in the middle of your categories. That's why this is all based on these columns here are participation hours. The other part of this, and let me see, actually, you know what I can do? Because I want to give you some context here. It's on my website, so I'm gonna, whoops, that's not me. What's going on there?
You have a capital P. almost.
Yeah, there we go. Forget what page it's on. There it is. So this is the perfect model, right? Or I shouldn't say perfect, but this is the ideal, how the graph should look for you. So you can think of these as, again, these categories down here. This would be your stoplight. So this could be, green, yellow, red, that type of thing. The red line here is subsidy. So generally you have most subsidy down on this end of the graph and less subsidy on this side of the graph. The green is cost recovery percentages. So generally your cost recovery percentage would be lower on this side of the graph because you have a higher subsidy and a higher cost recovery level here. And then this gray line is kind of where you're actually at, just to kind of show you where you're actually falling. So this is the ideal model. For this client, you can see that they've got a ton of participation hours here and here. And there's participation hours down here, and if this wasn't so high, this would look more like a bell graph for them. But you can see the red line. Again, the red should be higher here and lower here, which it pretty much is. It's got that trending towards lower. This green is going to be whatever it is, because this is what they put in. So this is their cost recovery goal. And then the yellow is where they're actually at. So you can see where it's kind of following the green line. So they're doing pretty good. Now, this client has been using this software for 3 years. So they've gotten better each year as they've gone through this process. So that's why this chart is fairly good for them. But again, the ideal is kind of this picture here. So that's one of the charts and graphs. Within the charts and graphs, you could go crazy about what you want to do with the information, because you can click on this and it'll drill you down into the data. And then you just So if you're in a meeting or something like that, and you're like, what makes up that number? You just click on it, and it'll drill you down into it. Another chart and graph. So that was just one of them. Another one that people find useful is this one here. So what this one is by program area. So that's aquatics and camps and golf programs, gymnastics. So what this is showing is the green is their actual revenue, and the blue is their total expense. So this is giving you somewhat of a revenue to expense look. And then this orange line is their cost recovery goal, and the yellow is their actual cost recovery. So again, it's giving you a visual comparison of where you're at and where you're going to some degree. Again, these reports are, you can click on any of them and drill down into the data itself. Some simple pie charts, like if you want to just look at total expenses. So if we look at, say, your brochure service areas, which are your program areas. So this is a pie chart just showing you by expenses by area. So, Expand is their program for people with disabilities, gymnastics, sports, aquatics. And again, if you want to see what these are, you just click on it, and it'll drill you down into the actual data. So this is showing you that breakdown of the $419,000 that we started with. There it is right there. So it shows you what they started with and then all the allocation distributions to make up that $419,000.
You're a genius. You created all of that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Not this, I created all the algorithms
Okay.
and the reports, but I didn't, the software itself is called QuickBase. It used to be owned by Intuit, which was like TurboTax. Now it's owned by a privately held company, but that's where my platform is on their platform. So it's a fully online hosted software. The other thing about charts and graphs too, if you wanted to, you're like, oh, I really don't want to look at that. I don't want to look at this. You can just click on certain things to see, if you wanted to see just certain things, you can just, and if you wanted to add them back in. So it's pretty neat to be able to do that.
Very cool.
If you do multiple years of information, so you did this, say, for 18, then you wanted to do it again for 19 and 20, you can start to run what we call benchmarking reports. You can benchmark against yourself instead of benchmarking against other communities. And that's what these year-to-year reports are. We don't have to go into that, but I just wanted to show you that those are there. If we were to do...
Facility manager report. Let's look at one of those.
All right, so let's look at this one here. So this report, this is a spreadsheet type report. So what this report is showing you is by facility, their actual revenue, their total expense, their total cost recovery from a rental perspective, right here. So this is only rental recovery. The overall recovery for all facilities. And then we take you through kind of the process of, here's what your projected revenue is going to be. Here's what the projected program or course use of the facility. So when we charge aquatics to use the pool, that's what this column is. Then we look at, if there's anything left over, will we allocate that to become a membership expense? So let me just give you a verbal example, and then we can talk about what will happen there. So let's say you have a community center that costs $1 million a year to run. The first thing that the system is going to do is it's going to say, how much rental revenue can we get back for that facility? So let's say we bring in $100,000 in rental revenue. That leaves $900,000 remaining that hasn't been accounted for yet. The next thing that we're going to look at is charging the programs to use that facility. So we've already figured out what it costs to run each area of the facility, and we're going to charge the programs that cost to use the facility. So let's say that brings in another $100,000 of projected revenue. So that leaves $800,000 remaining from the facility. Really, the only other way to get revenue for that facility is to have memberships, so drop-ins, annual passes, punch cards, that type of thing. So what the system does is it asks you, what do you want to do with that $800,000? Do you want to apply it, all $800,000 of it, to become the membership expense, or a portion of it? So you could apply $400,000 of it. And that's what this third column is. If you apply everything, if you've gained some projected revenue from rentals, you've charged the programs to use the facility, and you've dumped the remaining subsidy into memberships, you're going to have 100% cost recovery for the facility. That doesn't mean you still don't have subsidies for, say, the membership side of the facility, but from the facility use perspective, there's 100% cost recovery. So that's what this report is. It's kind of showing you step by step what you're started with and what the projections are going to be for the future. Again, it's a pretty detailed report. Any questions on that report? I know it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, so you mentioned something earlier. Talk to me about how folks have been using your tool to build their budget, if they're not
So
on a program budget format.
So they could, it's not a short answer, but I'll try to keep it short. So let's say you have, again, I'll just use aquatics as an example. Hopefully they know how much they're expending. And they should know what they've offered in the past. They should know, in theory, if you're the supervisor, what the going rate is for, say, a lifeguard and or a swim instructor. They should know in general what their supplies and materials are, for to hold those programs. So what this system is going to do is it's going to give them a general overview of how those expenses are broken up, to show them, okay, here's what you are expending, and here's what your overall cost recovery is for each of these different programs. So the first step in that is to say, in looking at each individual program, they should be able to discern, are there certain programs that we're offering that we shouldn't be offering? And that's either based on they have no cost recovery, or they have, and or they're just too expensive to offer based on the stoplight model, because that always comes back into play here, the stoplight model. So then they should be able to determine how many programs should we be offering, where should we be offering them, and should we continue to offer them? Then based from that, they should get a general sense from this information to know, here's generally what it costs to offer a program that costs, that gives 10 hours of instruction. So let me show you an example of a report that gives us that type of information. So again, I just go back to this detailed report. But within this report, it'll show you what the hourly expense is. So if we were to grab a category, so again, this is, I'm going to filter this report just by aquatics so that we don't get anything else in here. So this is telling us that here is the hourly expense. And at the bottom of the report, there's 6 pages, I believe. Yes. At the bottom of this report, let me make sure I'm in the right column. So on average of these 500 and the average hourly expense is $32. So they could use that as a starting point to say, okay, on average, it's costing us, not the fee. And again, there's a big difference between the cost and the fee. The cost is what it costs to offer it. The fee is what you're charging the client to take it. But the cost on average is about $32 per hour per person. So when you're starting a new program, you could use that number
That as your baseline.
as you're starting. Yeah. So if you say, okay, well, I'm going to offer a program that's going to be a total of 10 hours of instruction. In theory, I should be charging $320. That's a starting point. So does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes it does. Yes it does. Well, I should have allowed you to do this presentation last week. I mean, that walkthrough you gave me, I did not deliver it very well, so you did a great job now. So
Okay.
I think we're at a point where we can
Time out?
Can you just kind of do a summary before you time out?
Yeah. So in summary, what we want to focus our energy on while I'm here on site, so today and Friday, and it doesn't, I mean, we can do this over WebExes and the phone too, but it's going to be The first decision that needs to be made, the biggest decision, is what will be the service areas. And again, we don't have to bite off, we don't have to do everything. If we want to say, you know, out of the 275 million, we want to look at this portion of it, that's a starting point. But that's the big decision that needs to happen first. And then once that decision is made, is we want to make sure that we can classify each of those areas by facility areas and program areas. And then if there's memberships that belong to any of those facilities. Point of sale, if we're going to do that or not, that's more of a minor decision, but someone that still needs to be made. So once this decision is made of the service areas, then it's going to be working with Melissa and the finance people to say, can we get budgets for those areas? In addition to that, and what Leon will be doing at the same time is he'll be digging deep into the stoplight model and making sure that that's moving forward, you know, making sure that that's where you guys want to go with that as well.
So we're doing a parallel kind of.
Correct. Yes. But those are the big decisions that need to be made in the next couple days.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey, for this very informative presentation.
Thank you.